Welcome to Cycling Demystified, brought to you by Foundation Bike Fit and Frequency Cycle Works, the podcast where we help you take your cycling to the next level by sharing the knowledge from experienced bike fitters, mechanics, and the hidden players within the bike industry.
All right, welcome back to the podcast team. We are here today with me, Wei, and
Grumpy old Matt again.
Grumpy old
It's
Matt.
the theme here.
Yeah. God, if you made it through this far, I think you're doing pretty well. Anyway, welcome back to our 6-part series on 6 modern mistakes of bike fit, which we're seeing, and we are dispelling these myths and mistakes so that you can make better decisions about your bike fitting, take your riding to a better level. So today we are going to talk about
Optimisation culture.
all right, optimization culture. What does this mean? What could this possibly mean? Just before we get going as well, if you hear some huffing and puffing and scraping and bashing and hammering in the background, that's our mechanic Ev, who's busy at work.
Croissant in one hand, hammer in the other.
He's working on a very shiny Donu bike at the moment with a lovely custom paint job. But besides, let's get back to the podcast. So today we're going to talk about optimization culture and how that affects your decision making within bike fit. Would it be fair that maybe this discussion came about from all the bike fit questionnaires that we read, or pre-fit questionnaires that we send out, and probably the most common word that we see within that is optimize, because everyone wants to come in and optimize their bike fit so that they have optimal pedaling efficiency and
Or optimal whatever.
Anyway,
Sometimes spelt with an S, sometimes spelt with a Z.
so we're not saying that this is something that we shouldn't be aiming for, but I think bringing this back to kind of modern trends and things that we see that are affecting modern riders, we feel like maybe there's a larger culture which has been built up around this word optimization, which may not be benefiting how we approach or think about our bike fitting, how we get better as riders. And just wanted to explore that a little bit today and just see some of the things, or discuss some of the things that we see, some of the things that come through the studio. And yeah, we'd love to know your thoughts about it. I guess a good place to start would be kind of how we think about bike fit and what we want to get out of our bike fit sessions for our clients. Just as a kind of general note, what do we want out of our bike fits, and how does this fit into the optimization equation? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think providing some context in terms of how we approach bike fit can maybe benefit our listeners in putting their own priorities into context or in order with their bike positions, their bike riding, and their relationship to cycling and sport in general, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to some of the more traditional ideas around what bike fitting has been, or what it's been seen as, and what it's been kind of marketed as.
Yeah, we've discussed this at length before about bike fitting kind of as a word, or bike fit as a word being a bit of a misnomer, a bit of a potentially even a misrepresentation, certainly of what our approach to bike fit is. And I think, giving some context as to, our approach and how optimization culture fits into that, where it fits into that, and at what stage it fits into that. Might be some good context.
Yeah, so I think the easiest way I can explain it is actually, I think we see bike fitting more as a form of coaching, in a way. So, this provides the idea that it takes place as a process that extends over a longer period of time, so that we can develop riders progressively, rather than bike fitting being a single event that just happens, and that happening is a kind of solution. It's correct. And I think bike fitting's been sold as this kind of thing that just kind of happens, and it is changing, of course. Like, I think over the course of the last 15-20 years or so, I think more and more bike fitters are trending towards the kind of process driven side of bike fitting. But as with all things, it takes time to kind of change the culture and thinking, and the wider culture, not just those who are kind of within the bike fit culture or deep within bike fitting, doing it every day, but actually within the wider cycling community. But I think that got us thinking about, well, what else affects the idea of bike fit being this kind of one-time event, this thing that you should go and do because it will, using the buzzword, optimize your position, and then you'll be set. That's, you're done, you're ready to go, the bike's perfect, off we go, ride, and you can ride at your best. And so we started thinking about just the wider context of kind of how we approach sports in the modern world, and all the things that kind of lead towards this idea that we can just kind of buy stuff and have one-time events, and that will just kind of solve our issues. I think that's the crux of the issue. So, would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's very much a if input equals this, output will equal that kind of mentality at the moment, or certainly kind of more and more with. And I think this has always been this isn't anything new, but I think there's like a modern kind of like acceleration of this thought process that if I buy this product, if I train at these inputs, whatever you want to call them, then I will reach this goal in this artificial time frame. Yeah. And that is, well, put it bluntly, you're setting yourself up for disappointment because everything is a process. And I think going back to what you were saying about bike fit, I think like it kind of got me thinking when you were talking about when bike fit became popular, circa 2011, 2012, the landscape of the cycling industry was very different. It was very much like there was bricks and mortar shops on every corner, certainly in London. I mean, you had an Evans and a cycle surgery basically every as often as you had a Tesco. Yeah. And a lot of shops were offering air quotes bike fits in order to sell bikes. So, and that was the whole driving force of like the kind of the explosion in bike fit. Like bike fit's always been a thing, but it was kind of exploded into kind of like cycling mainstream with the advent of certain motion capture systems, which essentially were designed to enable more sales effectively. Yes, you could like get it a bit closer in terms of getting that customer on the right bike, but it was a sales tool effectively. And what we're seeing kind of in the way I kind of define modern is effectively the post-COVID era. And what we're seeing now in the post-COVID era, and the people that are still doing bike fit, they've had to kind of like really rethink how they approach it into this more process-based, more individualized, more long-term approach, essentially in order to survive. Because the volume just isn't there anymore. Like I remember like back in the day, circa 2015, we'd go into work in the bike shop. We'd be open for 6 hours on a Saturday. We'd sell somewhere between 12 and 15 bikes in 6 hours. Bonkers. You don't get that now. Yeah. So there is this adaptation that's kind of had to go on within, like certainly bike fit practitioners, I feel, into this kind of more process, long-term based approach in order to just survive in doing what we're doing. But I'm not sure that the kind of the bike industry at large or the consumer psyche has kind of caught up with that yet. It's still very much marketing led. And if you purchase this product, which is X amount of watts faster at 50k an hour in an artificial environment, under certain yaw angles, you will get this. You know, and people drink the Kool-Aid. And it's like, oh, take my money. Yeah, I want that. Rather than looking at it as more of a long-term process-based approach in terms of, okay, yes, there are certain kind of like short-term optimizations that might nudge the needle forward in terms of your progress, but we're missing a massive chunk of the puzzle by just focusing on those small kind of immediate instant gratification kind of wins.
Yeah, but I think this comes down to just how we're wired as human beings. You know, we all want the easy way forward.
I disagree with that. I think it's how we've been conditioned. I don't think we're wired that way. I think we're conditioned that way.
I struggle with it a little bit.
The bear.
Yeah, I struggle a little bit with it because, okay, so it comes down to like the human condition of like kind of wanting immediate results. You know, we're always, I think we're more hardwired, or we feel it's more attractive to have the kind of immediate results. So a lot of our kind of modern world actually rewards kind of longer term thinking, although it's becoming harder and harder to actually kind of make sure that we kind of still utilize that kind of long-term thinking process. So like, you know, just investing in something, you know, you put money in, you wait X amount of years and you'll get something out at the end of it. You know, that's like a hard thing to do.
But it's such a simple concept.
It's a simple concept, but it's hard because I think that's just not how, you know, our bodies are kind of really designed. Like, you know, being in the present, being in the moment. You know, if I don't know, if you took it back to like kind of biological beginnings, like, you know, if you were a human out on the savannah trying to survive, you know, and you came across, you know, a bunch of grapes or something, you would absolutely just kind of take that bunch of grapes like right there and now. You wouldn't kind of, you know, try and save it for another day, because you couldn't. You know, it's there and it's happening now. Or, you know, if there was, you know, some prey out in front of you, you'd have to react to that kind of moment. And it's not until, you know, you start introducing agriculture and things like that and preserving foods that then we can get into a culture of saving for, you know, a later date. But that kind of hard wire of, you know, wanting stuff in front of us still exists. And so I think a lot of modern culture taps into that kind of, right, let's just do it. Like that kind of instinctual and maybe more emotional kind of instinct of just wanting something straight away. And there is an allure of all these things that we can buy that will kind of make that process quicker. Like I can become a better cyclist if I buy a power meter, because it's going to tell me how many watts I'm producing. But it's not going to make you a better power meter, a better cyclist. It's just going to tell you, you know, how many watts you're producing. But the selling point behind it is that it's going to make you a better cyclist. And so people know how to sell stuff really well these days. You know, they can tap into that, you know, that desire behind all the wrist-based watches, all the head units, all the power meters and things like that. And I think that's what we see. We see people coming in and, you know, the greatest resistance we have over changing crank length for someone, or when we recommend, look, biomechanically this is much better for you, the biggest pushback is like, oh, well, I've got a power meter in there. It's like, oh, I've put all this money into it and this power meter tells me how many watts I'm producing, and so you're going to take that away from me?
What if by shortening your cranks that number was bigger?
Yeah, but like it's
Yeah, but exactly, that's it.
Yeah.
It's the human nature.
It's the
But I
human
think there's like there's a nuance, a big nuance here that's missing
Mm.
in the fact that it's kind of like, yes, there is that kind of primal, I need this now because this is like survival instinct. But we have the ability as humans to think critically
Mm.
and to choose either a instantaneous action or a long-term approach, depending on the situation in front of us. And I think where a lot of society goes wrong is that we're losing that ability to think critically and look at a situation objectively and go, right, what is the best path forward for me as an individual, rather than just kind of like drinking the Kool-Aid of whatever, you know, the internet is telling you this week. And I think that's the kind of the difference. So yeah, there are kind of like both elements play a part, but you can't have one without the other.
So bringing this back to what we titled this episode about, the idea of optimization culture
Yeah.
is basically what the companies who make all these devices and bikes and things essentially want to sell you. They want to sell you the idea that, you know, you can be a better cyclist if you buy this thing, and it will just kind of happen. Whereas actually the reality, whenever you like kind of buy a certain product, you quickly realize that, yeah, it tells you a number. And then if you're thinking critically about it, what do I do with this number? What does it mean? How do I, you know, get the most out of my body with this number? And so there's a whole like kind of extra level of understanding, education, information that needs to go into getting the most out of the tool that you just bought. And I think the same can be applied to kind of like bike fitting, where bike fitting was essentially, yeah, you were saying it was essentially commodified as this thing by bike shops. And, you know, I have to say that, you know, like some of the intention is good. You know, bike fitting is a good thing and you want to sell a good thing. And the idea is that you can use bike fit to make a bike feel more comfortable and people to ride better and so on. But then there's a line that crosses into just selling, you know, bike fit as this thing.
Yeah.
Where you start to lose some of that, the benefits of it. Anyway, so going back to where we were, like because bike fit's been commodified, then I guess people treat it in the same way, or it's easy to treat it in the same way as any other kind of product that you buy, and I think people do come into our bike fits like a little bit more like with their eyes open, because normally they talk to their friends and so on, and you know they've educated about it. But there's still like a level of, you know, we start every bike fit with quite a lengthy discussion, and that's where you kind of set the scene, and it's often like kind of, oh, there's this eyes widening, going, oh, this is it. And especially when, you know, when you ask someone at the end of a session, you know, well, was that what you expected? And it's like, well, yeah, kind of not really, but like more than what I thought was going to happen. You know, why does it take 4 hours to do a bike fit? Well, there's a lot that goes into it, but you know, those hours fly by because there's just so much happening, so much information happening. So yeah, what do we what do we do with this? You know, I guess our message is to.
So I think like we have to kind of go back a little bit into like cycling context. Where does like modern optimization come from? And like we were discussing this before we hit record.
Yeah.
That I think, and we can, you know, there's this up for discussion, but I think modern optimization culture is probably made most famous by like Team Sky. Dave Brailsford, Team Sky, you know, kind of like the British cycling crowd circa 2009 onwards.
Suddenly Britons were winning races.
Exactly.
winning
Suddenly
the
we are
biggest
crushing
races.
the Olympics.
Yeah.
Where we've got British riders winning Grand Tours.
Yeah.
And all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, all right, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
So I think that, for me especially, is
Yeah.
where kind of like the optimization kind of culture within cycling really kind of like boomed.
Yeah.
But if you delve, and like people get misconstrued with all this stuff. So it's like, I'm going to shave my arms, and I'm going to, measure out my carbs and measure out my pasta, and get my kind of like electrolyte maltodextrin mix, super fuel, carb, whatever rubbish in my bottle. I'm gonna get all the TUEs I can and all this stuff. It's like, well, actually, what were they optimizing? And they were optimizing the basics first and foremost. So the big things, the big three that kind of like British Cycling and Team Sky were kind of like really kind of focusing on were sleep. So if you read, there's a really great book by a chap called Nick Littlehales. It is literally called Sleep. And this guy, he used to be a mattress salesman. He used to work for a really kind of big nationwide chain that sold beds and mattresses. But he was brought in by Alex Ferguson in the early 90s to Manchester United to look at optimizing their setup and, how important sleep is for recovery. Because, everyone's doing similar training. The training isn't the hard part. It's getting the benefit from the training, which only happens when you recover. And sleep is a massive part of recovery. It's probably one of the most productive things you can do. So optimizing sleep was...
No one's like coined the word like sleep doping or something.
Sleep doping. No, we've coined glute doping though, haven't we? That
anyway,
clown.
So
sleep was one of the massive things that Dave Brailsford and the British Cycling Team Sky optimised, and they had this consultant in Nick Littlehales come in to bring personalised mattresses, pillows, climate control for all the riders who were on Team Sky. So when you're riding a 3-week Grand Tour and you're staying in a different place every night, you know that your mattress is what you need in order to get a good night's sleep, and therefore recover and go again the next day.
Or even like stuff like, I know people are like kind of slagging them off for it, but like just getting a helicopter off the top of the mountain, getting Chris Froome or Bradley in the helicopter back to base as soon as possible so that they could recover as quickly as possible.
Not great for your carbon footprint, but good if you want to win a Grand Tour.
In the name of performance, it's getting, as you said, the basics of sleep.
So sleep was a big one. Nutrition. So, making sure that the riders are getting tailored nutrition to their specific needs, so that their body has the nutrients it needs to recover from the effort, build back to baseline level and hopefully stronger, so that they can continue to perform at the level that they need to. So making sure they've got food on hand, like getting good protein in, good carbohydrates in within that kind of window of opportunity after a session.
Or just quality of food. Traditionally, a cycling team would just rock up at a hotel in the middle of France and they'd just get served what the hotel would serve.
Exactly.
So Team Sky brought their own truck, their own chef, and so they could control all of that. So And what's the third, the last thing?
Mine's gone blank. Movement, that was it. Strength and conditioning. So basically making sure that the athletes can create good movement within their bike environment. And now this is particularly interesting for us as bike fitters and our philosophy, because as Ev always says, every bike's a slow bike until you put someone on it. So the bike is obviously very important, and it needs to essentially create the environment for you as the rider, the human, to create as much good movement as repetitively as possible for the required duration. And that, I'm sorry listeners, that is the only job of a bicycle. It is a tool to do a job, and its only job is to create the environment where the rider can create good movement. I know I've drowned a truckload of puppies there,
Yeah.
but that is it. That is it. And I'm sorry if I've kind of like burst your bubble, but that is the only job fundamentally of the bicycle in a performance kind of like light, right?
Yeah.
So once you've got those three things kind of down, was the basics, sleep, recovery, nutrition, and kind of like, you know, kind of intake and making sure that your body is adequately fueled, and the environment in which that you can create good movement, and also the ability to create that good movement. So making sure that you're working on asymmetries, you're working on weakness, you're building the strength and the capacity to build your own stability on the bike. So not even thinking about producing force here. I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet now. Not even thinking about producing force, but can you control your own body weight on the bike? You know, one of my favourite lines at the minute is like, bike riding is like taking a big dog for a walk.
Yeah.
There's a lady out of in East Village near the Vela Park who has a Bernese mountain dog. Can't be very old because it's pretty rambunctious. And every morning the dog takes her for a walk.
Yeah.
Are you relying on the bike to create your stability? If you are, you might want to rethink your relationship with the object and making sure that you can create that good movement and you're in control of it yourself. So these are the three big kind of, I don't even think they're optimized, they're maximized. And you can't optimize until you maximize. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very good. I like that.
Yeah, you've got to maximize before you can optimize people.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you are setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, but I like the idea of just breaking it back down to the core values of what you're trying to do. You know, to be a better human, you're trying to, you know, move better within that context. What allows you to move better? Well, your ability to kind of function and recover and build, which you get from sleep and nutrition. And yeah, I think this is where, you know, all the kind of tools that we talked about before, like power meters and devices and all these other things, wearables that you can put on, they are there to kind of help you optimize those basics. And
But they have to be put into context.
yeah,
So they are not the be all and end all.
no, the device itself won't make it all happen. You have to make it happen.
Exactly.
But maybe those devices will help you kind of make better decisions. But that, you know, it's only one facet within everything else, and actually the overall equation is fairly simple.
Yeah.
You know, those three things: sleep, nutrition, movement. If you can get those kind of roughly right, then you're winning.
Yeah.
Which is great. But I have to say that actually trying to get those three things right within our modern lifestyles is actually quite difficult.
That's really hard.
Yeah, no. Especially, you know, if you're like a working parent with young children and you have to commute in for, you know, however much time a day, and you've got a stressful job and lots of responsibilities, you know, balancing all of that is like difficult. I think that's where some of the attraction of these kind of devices, which can just give you a number and, you know, you can make a decision very quickly, comes into play.
It's the same with your bike fit, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like, yeah, you can plug in a computer and it'll tell you these numbers and you can just kind of go with that number. Or, as what we do, we can go with the number and use that as a start point to explore, okay, what happens if we put the saddle a little bit higher? What happens if we put it a little bit lower? What happens to the number? What happens to the human? What do they feel? And so on. And I think that's kind of what's missing. Like the idea of optimizing just through using a device isn't actually optimizing. It's just giving you another kind of reference point of like, well, I'm getting this number. Okay, what happens if I go a little bit above that number or a little bit below that number? Like, does it get better or worse? And, you know, just the fact that, you know, every wearable will give you a different number anyway, depending on algorithms and how they measure and all the rest of it.
Well, there's that story about the Apple Watch, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, I think, yeah, just the idea that, I don't know, it's easy to get too reliant on those numbers and seek too much safety within a particular number. And actually optimizing is, like, the idea of optimizing is like searching, exploring, like it's looking, questioning all the time. You know, if you've got a certain number, it doesn't stay static. You know, what happens if I push it a little bit today, or bring it back down a little bit today?
What happens if you have a bad night's sleep?
Yeah.
All this stuff. So it's all contextual, but I think one of them, you know, going back to the theme of this series, the modern mistake is that we take it out of context, and we look at the number, or, you know, the output as kind of like the end in itself, rather than giving that number context.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where a lot of it kind of falls down in terms of the modern sense, that, you know, we get kind of like so blinkered into one thing. We think far too vertically and not horizontally enough.
Yeah.
You kind of focus and hone in on one particular thing, which is going to revolutionize your riding, and then you're just left disappointed because you've forgotten all the other stuff that kind of goes into giving that one thing context.
Well, I think, it's setting expectations again, isn't it? That, again, this is why we try and push bike fit as a practice, something that is continuously developed, rather than just, you know, we do it kind of once. Because, you know, otherwise, you will be disappointed, because there's so much more that could be explored. There's so many factors that go into your movement, you as a human being, and, you know, moving within the limitations of bicycle.
I think it's a practice and also an ongoing conversation, and a conversation that you've kind of got to have with yourself on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah.
And being objective with yourself is quite hard.
Yeah.
Especially because of, you know, kind of our nature these days of, you know, wanting the hack, wanting the quick way round, and, you know, wanting the big goal, if you like.
Yeah.
And kind of wanting that, you know, giving yourself basically what is essentially a hard deadline in order to achieve something or fail.
Yeah.
It's black and white. There's no middle ground.
Yeah.
And this kind of like idea of, like, you know, what we try and do with our fits of a more process-based kind of approach, then all that deadline means is that it's a test of the fitness, the movement, the kind of process, to see it as a marker to see where you're at. And that's all, you know, that's all this is. It's like, is it working? Yes or no? Then you have a direct decision to make in terms of, you know, do you carry on down the current path, or do you change? And then there's other questions like, all right, what do you need to change? And usually it's not the width of your handlebars, you know, the position of your shifter hoods or whatever it is. It's usually something bigger and more basic and more boring, like an extra hour's sleep. Yeah, you know. Yeah. So it's kind of like having those conversations and being objective and kind of like honest with yourself about, right, are my expectations realistic? Like, I'm all for setting big goals, but don't set yourself up for failure. And are you checking in with yourself regularly enough to see if you are on track objectively? Are you covering the basics? And if not, what are you willing to do about it?
Yeah. So you hit another like little buzzword that set my brain off there, and you said boring. And
endurance sport is boring, man. Like, I remember, I've got coaching a lad who's running London Marathon this year, and when we first started, the first thing I said to him was, marathon training is boring. 95% of the time. And it is. And, you know, you've just got to basically build the house brick by brick. And you can't put the roof on until you've got a good foundation, solid walls, and everything's kind of in place to do the fancy stuff.
But I think it kind of gets to the crux of, you know, why like buying stuff is exciting.
Yeah, because no one's got a boredom threshold anymore.
Yeah, you know, like buying something is immediate. It happens, and then, you know, because it happens, you expect like an immediate result. Whereas if you prioritize something like sleep, well, you got to go to sleep for like 7 hours, and then you got to wake up.
And then you got to do that the next day, and the next day, week and month and year on year. Yeah.
And so sometimes if you think a little bit too long term, I think you can get overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I had a very good coach who told me that, yeah, you need to prioritize your sleep. So how do you make that really attractive? So if you've read James Clear's like Atomic Habits, one of the key points that he makes is that if you want a new habit to form, you have to make it attractive and you have to make it easy. So the same applies. If you want to make sleep a priority, you need to make it attractive. You
Pillow
need to
spray.
make it, yeah. Well, I don't know if you, but well, that gets to it, my old coach Dina Blacking, had her on the podcast before. She told me that you want to make your bed basically as attractive as possible. Like, get the best mattress that you can, get a really comfortable pillow, get like a really nice duvet, and make it like that you want to go to bed, and then you will. Like, if it's a crappy bed and you don't want to get into it, then you're not going to go to sleep. So
True.
just make those things attractive. Make meal times attractive. Make the food that you want to eat. I mean, obviously you can't do it all the time, but if you can make the majority of that practice attractive, then that's great.
60% of the time it works every time. But it's true, and everyone should listen to Dina because Dina knows.
There we go.
But yeah, you got to make it kind of, in order to form the habit, you have to make it as exciting as you can initially, so then it becomes routine.
Yeah.
And then there is effectively a springboard to go on and do the next thing, because you've built that base and that routine of the foundations, which is sleep, nutrition, movement. And then you can start to do the fun stuff.
Cool.
But until you do that, respect yourself. Get the basics right.
All right, there we go. I think that's a good place to leave it.
Knock it on the head there.
Yeah, get the basics right. Sleep well, eat well, move well. Be able to ride your bike well. All right, team. See you on the next one.
If you made it to the end of this episode, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, do leave us a rating or review, as this really helps other riders find our podcast too, and motivates us to keep making more episodes. Thanks for your support, and catch you on the next one.
Suffering from numb hands, tingling toes, and any other persistent discomforts when you ride? These are all signs that your bike fit could be improved. If you're bike fit curious, get in touch with Wei or Matt by emailing info@foundation.fit or finding them on Instagram @FDN_bikefit. Finally, for all your bike servicing needs, custom dream bike or hand-built wheels, go to www.frequencycycleworks.com or find me on Instagram @frequencycycleworks. Until next time, keep on spinning.